Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host, Kushal Mehra. All right, today we're going to be talking about the Dragon Man. In case you're wondering who the Dragon Man is or what the Dragon Man is, well, recently, I think it was northeastern China, researchers have discovered a new species called Homo Longi, if that is the right pronunciation. I don't know. I'm not good with them. So they gave it the nickname Dragon Man. And following that discovery, which was in the news, Razib came up with two amazing pieces, or I should say one podcast and one article or an essay. And I reached out to Razib. I was like, Razib, also the podcast which he had with Vadgish Narsimhan had too many technical terms, and I just messaged Razib. I was like, look, man, I don't understand half the things you guys were talking about, so you come on my podcast and explain it to me
Yeah,
in normal human language. So
we went
Razib,
full nerd. I just was like, let's just do it. It was a bonus podcast, so a lot of the podcasts are like pre-planned and evergreen, like they're not based on anything in the news. But this was like a big enough deal that I was like, like you should just come over and let's like talk about it from a nerd perspective. So, I guess like your listeners and viewers will want to know like why does this matter? Why do we care? I think the main reason we care is we just don't know that much about Asian human evolution, Asian paleoanthropology. So, some of your viewers probably know about Peking Man, which unfortunately was lost, and then Java Man, a few of these individuals. But, until recently, there weren't many universities in Asia studying archaeology. This contrasts us with Europe. So with Europe, we know a lot of things. And there's like this huge tradition of archaeology in various European countries, and European elites, like I don't know, King of Sweden, for example, he was pretty famous about this. They fund a lot of archaeology. They're looking and they're digging. This hasn't been as common in Asia. Partly is due to economics, but partly is due to just cultural orientation. So we don't know that much, and that's why Dragon Man's a big deal. Here's another big deal. I'm not a bones person, but the skull is really, really, really well preserved. So a lot of skulls that you see being studied or mentioned, they're like, I don't know, like half a face or something, and then they try to like figure out from that half of the face how to reconstruct everything. And, this was like a full intact skull. And so you could just look at it and draw conclusions without too many inferences. So we have a really good finding. It dates to about 140,000 years ago when modern humans, from what we know, were not flourishing across Asia. In fact, they were not flourishing outside of Africa at all. And so who is this individual? What is this individual? So the authors, there's several papers, and like if you go to my post at razib.substack.com, I link to them. They're free, so it should be accessible to everybody. One thing that they did, which I didn't necessarily object to, but I thought was interesting, was they took all the skulls that they had, and they basically did some, fancy analysis that compared the skulls to each other. So what they found was Homo Longi, Dragon Man, is more like modern humans, us, than it's like Neanderthals. Okay, and its brain's cranial capacity is in the modern range. It's in the high modern range actually, which is not surprising. Neanderthals had pretty very big brains too, but my friend the paleoanthropologist John Hawkes did note that the skull indicated the brain is going to be kind of narrow and long as opposed to like kind of like round and oblong like our brains, So there's lots of interpretations. And it doesn't seem like, I mean, literally like in the media they reported it. The people that were involved with this research disagreed on its implications. So one group thought, okay, well, this rewrites the human family tree. These individuals are closer to modern humans than they are to Neanderthals. So modern humans have some connection to East Asia in some way, I feel that was kind of an implication. The other group thinks that these are actually Denisovans. So Denisovans are a species known only from genomes. They have not been identified with any full remains, and the genomes are in Denisova Cave in the Altai, and they are a sister lineage to Neanderthals. So they separated from Neanderthals, say, like 500,000 years ago. And then both these groups separated from us, our Neo-African modern lineage, 750,000 years ago. And so I believe actually that this is probably what you'd call Denisovan. And so your question could be, well, then why is it like more like modern humans? And my answer is, well, Denisovans were probably really, really diverse in a lot of different racial groups. And, human populations vary. I'm sure that you've seen some people that you look at them and you're just like, Razib, I don't understand this idea that we're all descended from Africans relatively recently. This person looks like a Neanderthal. There's people like that. And that's just part of the modern human range. You're probably like, I don't know, like Buntu at the grocery store. I mean, I'm pretty sure you need to go check him out because I just think that, like, I mean, anyway, so I mean, this is like a common issue. We vary, we look different. There are people with pink skins, brown skins, big skulls, small skulls, long bodies, short bodies. And so if you just looked at the skulls and the skeletons, you'd be like, oh, these are different species. But we don't say that because we have modern humans around and we know that we can interbreed and all that stuff. So I think this is what I think happens. Denisovans are actually multiple different racial groups, multiple different, very different populations. We only have genomes from one of them in Siberia, but we have evidence from genomics of people in Papua New Guinea and other places that there were multiple different groups. And we don't have a good accounting of the skulls, of the skeletons in East Asia for various historical and cultural reasons at this point. I think that will change. And we will discover multiple different human populations that we would call Denisovan, but we would give them different names. And I do want to mention, this is called Homo Longi. It was discovered in Harbin in Manchuria. There was another Asian find from the 70s called Homo daliensis, and it was discovered in Dali, which I think is like South Central China. And a lot of paleoanthropologists say, well, you should just call this Homo daliensis because this looks like a better version of that skull. So this only matters because who gets to name a new species? That's a big deal. And so I think this group wants to name it a new species, but a lot of people say you're just rediscovering a species that was named and discarded because they weren't sure. So a lot of the issue what's going on here is we're going into uncharted territory, and so there's a lot of interpretations possible.
Yeah, but this is the interesting bit, Razib. So it's one thing to listen to the analysis from somebody who's in the field, whether it's paleoanthropology or genetics or anything of that sort, and it's quite another to read an average article in, let's say, in a New York Times or let's say reportage in anywhere in India outside. It's almost as if, out of Africa is at stake. Everything is at stake.
Yeah.
There is a lot of sensationalism. So now I want to go back a little because it's so I want to take you to something that you wrote today in your essay, Out of Africa's Midlife Crisis. So let us start with this. So you say something where you break human beings into largely three groups, where you say one is scarcely 500,000 of us are very diverse. The second one, you say 1.14 billion of us are not very diverse. And the third, you say, is 6.42 billion of us are very not diverse. Now, I think it's very important for people to get some sort of a idea about what you're talking about over here. So what you've spoken in the first 6 to 8 minutes, when you explain these 3 points so that we can build off of that.
Yeah.
So could you give an explanation of that?
So I don't know. People find this to be a shocking thing, but it's so boring that I barely mention it. Everybody outside of Africa and in North Africa, they quite clearly, from the genetic evidence, descend from, say, 1 to 10,000 people. One particular tribe or group of tribes that were isolated probably in Northeast Africa and Arabia 60,000 years ago. And so this population expanded between 60 and 50,000 years ago. By about 50,000 years ago, it made it to Australia. Obviously 15, 20,000 years ago, it makes it to the New World. But these are modern humans. These are non-African humans outside of Africa. And we're all genetically relatively close together. And so the fact that I put in that piece, which is shocking to a lot of people, you can take two San Bushmen from the Kalahari in Namibia, and they're in neighboring tribes, and let's say they speak different languages, okay? But they're 50 miles away. The genetic differences between those two groups, in the genetic regions, those two individuals is 25% more than between a Chinese person and a Northern European. And so what is that telling us? What that tells us is the genetic variation in the Kalahari among these San Bushmen goes back beyond 60,000 years. Like it could go back 80,000 years that they started diversifying. And when you look at the whole genomes, one thing you could say is These San Bushmen, these African hunter-gatherers, you know, the most diverse population, as you say, they started separating from other branches of humanity, say 200,000 years ago. And those other branches of humanity include everybody else in Africa and everybody outside of Africa. And so it is true that when you look at, say, a Nigerian genetically, they're going to have fewer differences with everybody outside of Africa than they will with a San Bushman in South Africa. And so the point here is, okay, 60,000 years ago, there was an expansion out of Africa. It creates this homogeneous people all across the world. Within Africa, though, humans had been there and interacting and evolving and developing for probably at least 150,000 years, definitely at least around 100,000 years. And there is a fossil in Morocco at a site called Jebel Irhoud that dates to about 350,000 years ago. And this fossil has proto-modern features, not a modern fossil. My friend Chris Stringer, I did a podcast with Chris Stringer, you can find it on my Substack, and he talks about this extensively. It's not a modern fossil, it has robust features. The first definitively modern fossil where it's like everything looks pretty modern is a fossil called Homo in Ethiopia, dates to about 200,000 years ago. And this is why, and Homo dates in the 70s, and this is why people said, oh, we're all Africans and we're all out of Africa. And that's kind of true. That's kind of true. But there's a lot of details and moving parts to the model today. And I just want to explore that a little bit in my piece today, as we're recording. And, I just have to say, I don't know actually what the future holds. Like, I can tell you for certain, I think I know about our ancestry outside of Africa. But there's a lot of details that still need to be fallen in place. Like the complexity within Africa is quite great. And then outside of Africa, I think it's quite plausible, and we know for a fact actually that there are modern, like, African type humans that seem to have left before the 60,000 year wave, and they may not have any descendants. So it could be, I don't think this is true, but it could be the Dragon Man is related to an African population that left early. Because we know Neanderthals have some modern human ancestry. They have ancestry that's that's distantly related to other modern human populations, but it's clearly from Africa, probably within the last 200,000 years. And so, what I just told you there is, well, there's modern humans like us, but then there were earlier modern humans. And then there are humans like Denisovans and humans like Neanderthals. So it just starts to get complicated. And within Africa, we don't have enough fossils, but aside from Homo naledi, and there's one Ilaru in Nigeria that dates to 10,000 years ago, it's quite clear that there were different human lineages within Africa besides modern humans until relatively recently, and they got absorbed just like Neanderthals and Denisovans. We just don't have their fossils because, hey, try to do an archaeological dig in Nigeria during the summer. It's just, stuff degrades and disappears, and so I think we don't have the samples for that reason.
So, and you mentioned this in your piece too, where you say, you talk about Dawkins and the famous T-shirt, "We're all Africans," or you talk about mitochondrial Eve. But so if I was look, my job is to make this podcast as simplified so that the average person listens to this and gets as much as they get out of it. So what would be the repercussions for, let's say, that Dawkinian image or the image of the mitochondrial Eve then?
Yeah, so the repercussion is basically, it's an anti-racist message. That we're all African, we're all related, all that stuff. And this message is pretty much still true. It's just more complicated than we thought 10 years ago. So this is what we thought 10 years ago. We thought 10 years ago that there was a tribe in maybe 20 years ago. People started changing their views in the 2000s. So 20 years ago, or if you go online and you Google 1987 Nova Eve documentary, it kind of outlined this pretty well. In East Africa, somewhere between 50 to 200,000 years ago, probably closer to 50,000 years ago, there was a tribe, and that tribe had some genetic changes or cultural changes, and that tribe is the forerunner of all people today. It replaced everybody else in Africa, and it replaced everybody outside of Africa, and that tribe was the tribe of mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam. And humans, our lineage kind of came about in a very rapid event, in a punctuated event, and expanded and replaced everybody with no admixture. That's the story. And so everybody shares common ancestors within the last 100,000 years, and we're homogeneous and stuff. that kind of still works if you just limit it to non-Africans, and then you have to admit there's Neanderthal and Denisovan ancestry in our heritage too. So it doesn't even work perfectly there. Within Africa, though, it seems quite clear that there are multiple modern lineages interacting together over hundreds of thousands of years, and it wasn't simply one East African tribe. I mean, we don't know where in Africa the first modern humans, as we understand them morphologically, evolved. Maybe that question is not even wrong. Maybe that's not a relevant question. Maybe they evolved in multiple places together in kind of like a concerted fashion, in a multi-regional fashion. So traditionally, that Homo fossil in Ethiopia 200,000 years ago, that's the first modern fossil. But Jebel or Hood is in Morocco. It's 150,000 years older, and it exhibits proto-modern features. So maybe we're all from Morocco. Maybe we're all from the Maghreb. There's a culture there called Natarian that has some archaeological remains. The point is, there's a lot of possibilities on the table now, as opposed to 20 years ago when we just had this model of East African, modern human, mitochondrial Eve.
So yeah, so I guess it's more of a political thing than as far as science is concerned. It really doesn't matter, right? Like as of now, like you mentioned in the essay, again, I want to read important points out of that because I think it's for the benefit of the viewers. Like you say, 93 to 98.5% of the ancestry of humans outside of sub-Saharan Africa derives from a breeding population of 1,000 to 10,000, which expanded rapidly 60,000 years ago. But maybe I'll request you to explain this thing, because I think sometimes what happens is maybe you as a scientist can say a punctuated event happened. No.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what do you mean? Are you talking about something like punctuated equilibrium versus gradualism, something of that sort?
Yeah.
And if it could you explain what that is?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of am talking about punctuated equilibrium. So there's an anthropologist, Richard Klein, he wrote a book called The Dawn of Human Culture, and he argued that 50,000 years ago there was a punctuated event, a mutation that allowed us to start speaking, and therefore we have all these cultural creativity, and we're just like this super species that eliminated everybody else. And so, a punctuated event is like maybe like humans arose over like 1,000 years, okay, or like 10,000 years. It's a little long, but maybe let's say 10,000 years in East Africa, okay? That seemed like a plausible model 20 years ago. I think today what I'm trying to say is like over 100,000 years over all of Africa, something like that. And so that makes a difference. I'm scaling up from like a small region to large, like perhaps the whole continent, and I'm increasing the time by a factor of 10. And so human evolution, our modern lineage, was more gradual. The expansion of the lineage out of Africa 60,000 years ago, though, is that's a more precise thing. It seems like it took about 10 to 15,000 years to fill up, all of Europe to Australia. So we started expanding about 60,000 years ago, mixed with Neanderthals 55,000 years ago. Looks like we hit Australia by like 48,000, and then Europe, it looks like by 45,000 or 45 to 40,000 years ago, we replaced the Neanderthals there. And so by 40,000 years ago, it's just us. Okay. So that's actually like over 20,000 years. So, what is that fast? Is that slow? It's up to you. 20,000 years is a long time ago in the past for us.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to say, like, probably around 60,000 years ago it started. Most of the expansion is done by 50,000 years ago, and then the last catch up had to do the last 10,000 years.
So again, it comes down to this, right? How is the scientific community then reacting to a scenario like this? Is the scientific consensus still pretty much on the out of Africa side, or there are now more and more credible voices that are coming and saying that things are not as clear? Maybe we need to hold this back on it and have an open mind. So overall, like, there's something called scientific orthodoxy too, right?
Yeah.
So what does the orthodoxy still talk about?
Well, it depends on what field you're in. Like, if you're an evolutionary geneticist, I think people have a more open mind. They know that there's a lot of like new data coming out that's like confusing their prior expectations. If, on the other hand, if you're just a generic biologist, you might just like know what was taught 20 years ago. So one issue is we don't have an orthodoxy that replaced the old orthodoxy. So we kind of know that the old orthodoxy is wrong in a lot of details now. But we don't have something clear and distinct and easy to just tell you. I mean, I've been talking to you for like a half an hour now or 20 minutes, and I'm kind of probably sounding confusing and complicated. It's because it's confusing and complicated. Like I could just make something up and saying, oh, we know, we don't. We're in the midst of a paradigm shift. We're in the midst of a paradigm shift. I think what we'll find is most of our ancestry does date to outside of Africa, does date to Africa within the last 60,000 years. That 60,000 years probably started in Africa, goes through Arabia, and then, really expanded to about 50,000 years. Within Africa, I think what we'll find is there was actually migration from the Northeast, whether in Africa or in Arabia, into Africa, into a lot of populations. And so modern humans emerged during this period of a great mixing and an expansion that occurred. We don't know why. Archaeologists, they have their own ideas. They have their own data. I don't know this very well, but I think there's something called the Upper Paleolithic lithic toolkit or something that seems to have expanded around this time. And so it might have been a cultural change related to that technology. And so I think the ultimate orthodoxy will be, okay, you have people within Africa like the San Bushmen and the Hadza and the Mobutu Pygmies that are hunter-gatherers, foragers. They have descent that's deeply rooted in Africa without that much mixture from the non-African lineage. And then you have Nigerians and a lot of other groups that actually are a mix between the indigenous African, these, I'm going to say like liminal Africans, because it could be they were expanding out of the Northern Sahara. Well, that's in Africa, right? I mean, so now we're getting into like the realm of words, and frankly, I don't really care too much, but okay, we're descended from a predominant population that expanded 60,000 years ago outside of Africa, and that also contributed a lot of the ancestry within Nigeria. Now, Nigeria, I'm using Nigeria because it has a lot of genomic resources and a lot of universities. We have a lot of samples from there. They have a little bit of Neanderthal ancestry, but not very much. So if you want me to get like a little nerdy, this is what I think happened. I think 60,000 years ago, there started to be an expansion in Northeast Africa, probably like Egypt, Ethiopia, or in Arabia, okay? And this lineage was related to other Northeast Africans, so that's actually closer to the Hadza hunter-gatherers than people in West Africa or South Africa. Okay, so there's an African population, it's a liminal African population, starts expanding. For whatever reason, it just really goes crazy north and east. It just replaces everybody. Okay, there's a little bit of Neanderthal, a little bit of Denisovan. In Papua, it's 5% Denisovan. But this population probably replaced everybody, including earlier modern lineages that have probably gone into South Asia and Southeast Asia. Okay, and in Southeast Asia, you have a lot of groups like Flores hobbits, Luzon humans that are tiny as well. You have Homo erectus descendants. You have various Denisovan populations. It just replaces everything. In Africa, you have a lot of regional populations that have developed over hundreds of thousands of years, of which this is one population. And so the ones who left Africa, who went, say, into Iraq, into Iran, and spread into India, and then in Europe, they mixed with Neanderthals in the Middle East, and so everyone has Neanderthal ancestry outside of Africa. I think there was another wave that came from the same population that went south and west. They didn't mix with Neanderthals. They had, so like there's not that much Neanderthal ancestry in Nigerians. There's a little bit from some back migration recently, but there's not that much because this population did never mix with Neanderthals that's going south and west. And its fraction in much of Africa, it's not like as I said like 93%, I think. That's because in Papua New Guinea, you have Neanderthal plus Denisovan ancestry. They're exceptional. Most people are 98% from this population, the vast majority of people in the world. Well, I think in Africa, the fraction is much lower than 98%. It's like, say, 50% or 70%, something like that. But because there's indigenous hunter-gatherers, there's modern human beings that are in Africa that are much closer, okay? And they mix with these expanding people, these liminal Africans. And so I think you have a model here of multiple types of admixture to various fractions 60,000 years ago to kind of give rise to us. Now, I do have to say, I'm going to give some credit here. There was a blogger in the 2000s called Dionysius Ponticus. He presented this on his blog. It's like Dionysius.blogspot. Just Google it, Paleo-African Dionysius. I actually thought he was crazy when he first presented this idea. It just sounded like crazy. But I actually think that he's more right than wrong now. And so his idea is like there's multiple mixtures that are happening and not replacements and stuff like that. So there you go. That's what I think happened 60,000 years ago, and that gave rise to us. But we are not the first, our lineage is not the first modern humans. Modern humans were around probably for around 150,000 years. in terms of like people we would recognize by their faces and their skulls as modern, they were probably around for 150,000 years before we started expanding rapidly our own current modern human lineage. Now, the Khoisan Bushmen, like they are part of the modern human lineage, but they weren't as affected by these advances out of out of Northeast Africa. I think in terms of like this advancing group didn't mix nearly as much with them, and so that's why their ancestry tends to be more deeply diverged. And so we had this like, and in fact, until like 4,000 years ago with the Bantu expansion, much of South and East Africa was dominated by foragers that were more distantly related to the other populations. And so what we've seen in Africa over the last 4,000 years is a great homogenization, a great pruning of diversity due to the expansion of agriculture. So Africa itself has changed a lot since the end of the last ice age. So there you go. That's kind of my...
So if I was to simplify it for humans, was that, and correct me if I'm wrong and I've completely misunderstood you, there was this pop culture image that we were all just basically one tribe in Africa that came out, and we're pretty much that tribe, all of us, over a period of time. Yes, we did breed with some people here and there, but we're pretty much that. But now with new inventions that are coming across, it could be a case, and that I think more is more because of how genetics has come out, and it has shown genetic diversity amongst human beings. The case could be that it is not just that one tribe. It could be the case of multiple tribes meeting each other at different times, at different phases, and maybe people in country X had an impact from a certain region. People in country Y had maybe an impact of some regions, and we now are, a product of more of that version of an admixture than the older pop culture image, right?
I agree. I have a friend who says that like human population genetic history over the last 200,000 years is just the collapse of structure. All that means is there's like all these deeply diverged lineages and they're mixing together, and we're just seeing this a lot. And this is also true more recently, where there's a lot of mixing together of lineages. So the human family tree is a little bit deceptive because it's more like a net, and genes are flowing to various extents and stuff like that.
All right. So Vagish and you in the podcast, you spend a little bit of time discussing what was that? Nesha Ramla Homo. Now, what happens to that?
Yeah. So this is and I said this in the piece. I think if Dragon Man wasn't discovered, one, it's in China. There's a lot of science happening in China. There's a lot of Chinese, so it's gonna get some attention. Two, it's called Dragon Man. I mean, it's just cool. Just saying, it's cool. And so it's called Dragon Man. It's a really, really good fossil too, if you look at it. Like, I mean, even I can tell, and I don't know this stuff. If that hadn't come out, Nesha Ramla would have been a much bigger deal, because Nesha Ramla, to me, it looks like a group of Israeli Neanderthals. So they seem to be related to Neanderthals. Perhaps they are Neanderthals. They're West Asian Neanderthals. So as I said, everybody outside of Africa, and in North Africa as well, actually, has a little bit of Neanderthal ancestry. I think that, look to Nesha Ramla, I think that might be the population that it's from, like that group of Neanderthals. And so I think like that would be a great story if this had come out at a different time. It's like, oh, we discovered our Neanderthal ancestors. Because it doesn't look like the Neanderthal ancestry occurred. There did occur Neanderthal admixture in Europe, but it doesn't look like modern Europeans have any of that. It seems to be the same stuff that's in Chinese people, that's in Australian Aboriginal people, that's in the New World. It's from something that happened really early on with expansion out of Africa. So where was that? It had to be in the Middle East. And these people, they look like Neanderthals, but their material culture is actually very similar to the Africans to the south and west of them, which indicates that despite the huge genetic difference, the huge evolutionary difference, a lot of these human lineages, they had tools that made them kind of modern. And there's more stuff recently discovered with like some sort of Neanderthal notching of like some symbolic stuff from 51,000 years ago. I mean, Neanderthals, they were different from us. Like they didn't seem to have the cultural plasticity we do. But I mean, modern humans didn't actually, like hundreds of thousands of years ago either. Their brains are about our size. They're shaped differently. But I think what this is telling us is human, despite the fact that like you're almost a million years diverged, it's human, it's very similar lineage. And I think it's telling us that there was a lot of diversity 50,000 years ago. Nesha Ramla is from about 120 to 140,000 years ago. Homo Longi is from 140,000 years ago. That's not that far long ago. I mean, There were modern humans 100% guarantee 140,000 years ago. We shared this planet with a lot of different species at that time. And, there was, I think like 115,000 years ago, there was an Eemian interglacial. There was a warming period, just like our warming period. And then there was an ice age again. So these are like really, really ancient times, but they went through some of the same things that we went through.
Awesome. So two things I want to touch upon, because you made a passing reference to them in the essay. So you talk about out of Asia now becoming slightly more probable. Now, for the absolute novice, what is out of Asia, and why has it become more relevant now?
Yeah, so out of Asia, and in the 19th century, Darwin was in the minority when he thought humans came from Africa because there's a lot of apes in Africa. A lot of people thought that humans must have come from Asia because Asia has more advanced civilizations, that sort of thing. But what we're finding from mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosomes, and total genetic diversity is that all non-Africans can be nested within the African lineage, right? From the modern populations. And so, you have this model where we are Africans, and so out of Asia was kind of dumb, or not dumb, but it didn't make any sense. Now, you can have apes exist in Southeast Asia, a lot of apes, as in Africa. And so I can see a situation where apes move from Southeast Asia to Africa and vice versa, or proto-humans, like really a long time ago. So that was the traditional out of Asia that was more plausible. But I'm talking about modern human origins. And so this is what I think is unlikely, but possible. You can imagine a situation where actually it turns out that the expansive modern human lineage 60,000 years ago, it's in Southeast Asia. So it expands all through Asia, mixes with some, Neanderthals in Iran, and then re-expands again and goes into Africa. This sounds complicated, right? This is why I say it's unlikely. But the dynamics of admixture that we're talking about, they are complicated. So it means that if you assume this model of expansion, admixture, etc., you can't necessarily reject yet the idea of a complicated model as opposed to a simple model. So in science, you go with parsimony, and that's pretty useful. But parsimony is no guarantee. Parsimony is probability. It's not like a perfect prediction. And so we need ancient DNA. We need more skulls. I think eventually we will establish we will know where the ancient proto, out of Africa expansion people were. We don't have ancient DNA that's super old outside of Siberia, in like parts of Europe, because it's hot, it's dry, and there aren't that many archaeologists there. Imagine going to do an archaeological dig in Iraq right now. Yeah, you're laughing, but now you understand why we might not have remains from Iraq, right? It's all about politics, all about modern contemporary things. It's not about the science, but that's just the way life is. So when we get DNA from 100,000-year-old remains, and right now all of the stuff is coming out of Israel because that's where you can do a dig. And Israel funds archaeology pretty well. And so it's not a surprise that Neshan Ramla came from Israel as opposed to Syria. But almost certainly there are hominins in Syria and Lebanon and other places. But you know what? Like, those people don't have the economic resources. There's civil war. There's other stuff going on. So we're not going to know. But I think we will know from ancient DNA 100,000 years ago at some point. We will discover a population where, like, this is the root population of the non-Africans. This is the tribe that expanded. And we'll probably, it's quite likely that we'll find that there was a massive expansion back into Africa as well, or at least to the south and the east if they're in Africa, say in Egypt or Nubia, somewhere like that. And I do want to say, like, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, and I'm not an archaeologist, so some people disagree with this, that there's some connection with technologies in Nubia and Egypt. So in Northeast Africa, with technologies, like archaeological technologies in Arabia. So our division between Arabia and Northeast Africa might just be, and biogeographically, it is artificial. Arabia's fauna and flora resemble Northeast Africa, not the Caucasus or Iran, right? It could be that the humans have always lived in Arabia, are just extensions of Africans.
Right. So you end your essay by saying we are all, so we can maybe get a new T-shirt titled "We are all African and Neanderthal." So here's my thing. So basically, what are you trying to print a picture where, yes, maybe there was this particular tribe that went out of Africa, but there were these other groups, and so would we say that basically there is no exclusivity in the out of Asia or on the out of Africa camp? Basically, we should not have an exclusivist position then?
I think we should not have an extreme position. And definitely exclusivist is correct. the exclusivism has been rejected empirically. Like, I mean, look at you. You're like 2% Neanderthal. Like, look at that face. You know what I'm saying? No, I'm just joking. I'm just hating. I'm just hating. But I mean, that's real ancestry, dude. I mean, like, you're 2% Neanderthal. Like, like, look at those big teeth. Like, it's probably like really great to like tear meat, and I don't know. So yeah, we're not exclusively like from that one lineage. And as South Asians, like, we have like 1.1 to 0.2% Denisovan ancestry. Like, that's not present to the West, but in Southeast Asia, South Asia, East Asia, there's really low fractions. So 0.1 to 0.2%. That's not that much, but it's real. It's statistically significant. You can detect it consistently. Like, this is real ancestry from the Denisova hominid. So we have connection to these populations in ancient South and Southeast and Northeast Asia, right? And so what does that mean? I mean, I don't think it changes our ethics. I don't think it changes our values. It's just something that we need to reflect on. And it's a fact. And facts are good and interesting. And, obviously they're like super important to me. It's just.
Not just to you. I'll tell you why. And this is something that you mentioned in the essay, that, Andaman and Nicobar Islanders have more in common with the Swedes than folks in Africa, right? That's what that as a question.
People get confused because of what they look like, but they share the same ancestry 60,000 years ago as people in Sweden, as people in Australia, as people in China. Like, we all come from that one tribe for like 93 to 98% of our ancestry, and that 93 is mostly in Papua New Guinea and Melanesia. So if you talk about Andamanese and Swedes, like, literally everything except for the Denisovan ancestry, they share the exact same ancestors 60,000 years ago. That's just a fact.
And it actually also says a lot about human beings and how superficial we are. And
Right, people don't want to, like, people are just like, yeah, but they have black skins and their hair, and because people want to say, like, oh, are they like the first migrants out of Africa and they're somehow related to Africans? And I'm like, yeah, they're related to Africans, but they're related to Africans just how a Finnish person is related to Africans. I mean, that's just like the fact. And so obviously the external physical appearances have changed over time, and that's just how it is. And you can talk about why. That's adaptation. That's natural selection. It's a different dynamic than just the phylogeny, than like the family tree. In terms of our family tree, all of the populations outside of sub-Saharan Africa go back to that lineage 60,000 years ago. That's just how it is. And the Andamanese are no closer to Africans than Finns, because it goes the exact same distance back to the same ancestor, right? And those ancestors have the same relationship to each other. So it's just like basic like geometry or topology.
All right, cool. Razib, just one last question, then we can wrap it up. So maybe in this field, is there something that you feel, if there is one particular discovery that if we were to find that would have literally, turn heads around and maybe change the whole thing, what would it take? What would that one thing be?
Okay, let me, if I had to think that one thing, if we get ancient DNA from elsewhere in, say, East Asia, and it turns out that there's another human lineage besides Denisovans and Neanderthals, maybe we didn't find Denisovan fossils because those were fossils of a different group. That's pretty weird. And maybe we will. The issue is, like, you can make statistical inference, and there were always suspicions by some researchers that there was Neanderthal ancestry, but nobody believed them, even within genetics, because you don't have the statistical power to make an inference from modern populations. But you can look when you have the Neanderthal genome, you don't need to do like a complex statistical game. You just compare the sequences. And so they just said, oh, 2% of our ancestry is clearly Neanderthal. And like, there wasn't a big debate about it, because just look at the sequences, right? It's not a statistical inference. So if we find another human lineage, and it turns out that there is ancestry in East Asia from that human lineage at low levels, that'll be a pretty big deal. I wouldn't be incredibly shocked, because we've already shown that we don't have the statistical power just with modern samples to make robust inferences that'll convince everybody.
Interesting. All right, Razib, this was fun. I hope people try and understand how complex these issues are. Unfortunately, when it comes to discussion of science at the layman's level, everything is, as you rightfully pointed out, in the essay, it's either this or that. It's either the Dawkins t-shirt or something else. But I mean, I think you've done a great job in that particular essay and in the podcast with Vagish. The podcast with Vagish was a little too technical,
Oh, right. You
but
know
the
what? There are nerds out there. You got some nerd listeners. Like, if you're into machine learning, you know what I'm saying? Like, get on it and like listen to it. It's free. Like, you can hear two brown nerds, talking about science. I mean, what's there not to love?
yeah, awesome. All right, Razib, it's a pleasure to talk to you always. Before we wrap it up for the day, anything coming up in the next few days or weeks that you want to tell
Yeah,
us
I'm
about?
gonna be I'm gonna be posting on the fins, the genetics of the fins. We'll be finishing up that series, and then I have a series on the step that I'm gonna start continuing. I'm gonna call it evolutionary adaptations, biological characteristics of the Yamnaya people, which a lot of your listeners will probably know about, and yeah, other stuff like that. Just continuing genetics history. I'm on Clubhouse every Friday. I do a lecture on a genetic or historical topic. And so find me at Razib Khan at Clubhouse. And to keep track of my stuff, the easiest place is probably just go to razib.com. I link to everything there and you can find it.
All right, guys, time to wrap today's discussion. I'm going to leave Razib's details, Twitter, his website, his Substack in the description of the podcast, whether it's on the audio version or the video version. Subscribe to his Substack. It is amazing. I have a lot of fun reading his essays and listening to his podcast. If you like what I'm doing over here, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment, become a member on YouTube. You know the drill. Sub Patreon and everything else. I'll see you guys next time. Until then, take care. Bye.